Makikita. Jabba wa ninchi ko babuishani kaitani wa nyaruska.
What are the economic lessons we can learn from Star Wars? This video is part of a series where I have conversations with Noam Ebner, a professor of negotiations and conflict resolution at Creighton University, and we examine a Star Wars clip, then discuss the economics, game theory, bargaining, and negotiation lessons behind them. Let's go to the clip.
Una tuta solo?
Yes, Greedo. As a matter of fact, I was just going to see your boss. Tell Jabba that I've got his money.
Song pichale. Marakamti tak makikita. Jabba wa ninchi ko babuishani kaitani wa nyaruska. Askinyawi kuchuso.
Yeah, but this time I've got the money.
Erjaya kulka hindi kuning kusuaw.
I don't have it with me. Tell Jabba.
Namahay kikti. Tongkuruye puyanya urwan spatika kushungu ponawat pipi.
Even I get bored at sometimes. Do you think I had a choice?
Club Jabba. Pukpa kumpak ni at apampa.
Over my dead body.
Ukle nyuma. Chespo kututa krista krenko. Yakoska.
Yes, I bet you have. Sorry about the mess.
Okay, so the famous, in the fandom, referred to as the Han Shoots First clip, although it will depend on which version you're seeing. Noam, you filled me in a little bit. Can you fill in the audience on how the different versions show different things here before we get into the...
Oh, sure. I mean, in the original trilogy, in the original making of this first movie, Greedo accosted Han. They sat down. Han distracted Greedo and then shot him preemptively. And when George Lucas remastered the movies later on, he changed the scene so that Greedo fired first, and as if Han was shooting in retaliation to that. Of course, this greatly angered many in the fandom who saw it as, you're retconning Han's fundamental personality and his morality and his approach to things, and we love Han for being this way. Don't change that. So that was you would hear debates at cons, and you would see people just walking around in T-shirts saying Han shot first, just on the street. And then later on, George Lucas re-edited it yet again. He was never fully satisfied with, he was never finished with the movies, never finished. And he re-edited it to have Greedo and Han fire at the same time. And he also, and this was his final edit, I think perhaps the final edit of the Star Wars movies before the sale to Disney, he edited it so that Greedo, before he died, uttered the word McClunky. And, leaving fans wondering what that meant and why it was so important to edit it. But we have these three versions, and of course they tie into perhaps, Lucas's view of morality, of what's right to do, of how the hero should act. But when you think about it, let's say from a game theoretical perspective, it's interesting in all of these, but it's most interesting, of course, in the original, right?
Yeah, and I mean, what's kind of fascinating is thinking of this as Greedo and Han playing in a prisoner's dilemma style game to me, right? You could imagine them. Now, most of them, right, you're separated and you're making an anonymous choice to cooperate or defect. And in a standard prisoner's dilemma style game, if both parties cooperate, they're definitely both better off than if both defect. Here, if both defect and both shoot and are both accurate at the same time, they both are killed.
Right.
If both cooperate, they're both better off than if they both defected because they're living. And in theory, there's some amount of spoils that they split. Now, the spoils they're splitting, Guido wouldn't get quite as much as he would have got by turning Han in. Han definitely has to pay something.
Right.
but they're both better off than if they both shot each other. So
and they might be able to figure out, jointly some very valuable payoff,
some
such as
bargain, right? So
yeah,
you would say
turning against Jabba, right?
competing against each other is leads to a Pareto inefficient outcome, or cooperation is a Pareto optimal outcome,
Right.
whereas competing is not. It's an inefficient outcome.
Yeah.
And that leads actually both sides have an individual incentive to defect or
Right.
to compete, because if Han defects and Guido doesn't, Han shoots and hits, Guido doesn't, Han doesn't have to worry right now about being turned into Jabba, and he doesn't lose any money by paying Guido off. If Guido shoots Han, Guido turns in Han, gets all the money back. So that it's an interesting problem, because from a point of view of all of the players, they're better off cooperating. But
Mhm.
each player has an incentive to defect, to try to harm the other player, because they are better off. In the prisoner's dilemma game, it's two prisoners separated, and will you confess against, and you say, oh yeah, I'll testify against the other person, just
Yeah.
don't give me much time. But if both are testifying, the police have a lot more. They're both going to put you away for a little bit more if you both just kept your mouths shut, because they wouldn't have had enough evidence.
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating, just from this point of view, that really it fits kind of the classic prisoner's dilemma style game.
Maybe one difference that occurs to me, and this comes more from a negotiation perspective, when you see prisoner's dilemmas in negotiation, is that, the classic prisoner's dilemma assumes that there's no communication between the two prisoners, right? They can't try and persuade effect. When it comes to negotiation scenarios with prisoner's dilemmas, so this is often softened by the fact that you can talk and you can try and impact both the payoffs and each other's choices. And it seemed as if, they started to talk, but at some point, from a cinematic perspective, I think it was very clear that at some early on point, it was clear that Han was using the conversation as a cover-up for unstrapping his blaster and moving on. And I wonder whether, the negotiator in me wonders, could they have negotiated their way to cooperation here, perhaps by making the stakes more overt, like more explicit, of cooperation and competition?
That's a good question. I don't know, right? I mean, Guido comes in and says, I found you, I'm going to turn you in, which essentially ends your life. I don't know. It's tough to think. What kind of cooperation could there, how easy is it, right? Even if collectively they're both better by cooperating than both shooting each other.
Yeah.
Clearly that strategy could have worked better than for Guido or on that, but I struggle to see. Part of is just the way Guido starts it all out.
So competitively, like there's my way or the highway, and
if he'd come in and said, Han, we got to have a drink here.
Yeah.
Jabba is offering this, and he told me, right, come find you, and I really don't want to do that, but it's a lot of money. Help me out, and help me out, and that's a little bit of a different setup. Once again, though, but that could have been the approach, and then maybe there was a bargain solution.
But you're right. I mean, generally speaking, if you want to hold a cooperative conversation with someone, don't start off by sticking a blaster in their ribs. Although sometimes that's necessary, you need to change the other's perceptions of things. I'm just thinking, just casting to Darth Vader trying to recruit Luke on the catwalk there in Cloud City. Right? Join me. Yeah, I mean, he's offering him cooperation essentially, but in order to bring him to that point, he had to cut off Luke's arm. So back to Greedo. Yeah, but we respond to competition often. We respond to it with instinctive competition, and that's where Han and Greedo found themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. Not as cinematically fun if Greedo comes off with a, hey, let me tell you this, but from a outcome point of view, could have been lower risk to still get a nice reward.
Right.
If that's the case. And if the bounty's dead or alive, then why didn't he just shoot him right away without any risk?
Right. So maybe there's that occurred to me, maybe there's a reward difference, whether he brings him in warm or brings him in cold. And that would explain why Greedo actually has different payouts depending on whether he shoots first. It would benefit him to some extent, but it wouldn't benefit him as much as if he something.
That's a fair
You're
point.
right. So from a back to the trust game sort of thinking, if you were Greedo, you would have shot first. I mean, from Greedo's perspective, I don't want to sort of put you in that you would have, but from a cold economic
calculation seems better. It seems stronger. So that's once again another short clip that gives some insights. So any final thoughts on these for the audience before?
Well, just as you said, that it would have, if everybody worked these things out either by applying, rational economic theory or by talking things out by holding constructive negotiations, the movies, really wouldn't have been as interesting or as much fun. It's called Star Wars, not Star, productive conversations or Star logical, thinking. But still, I find it interesting that there is so much that you can just see just an inch beneath the surface, and once we look at it through these lenses, we'll never see the movies again in the same way.
Correct. And we'll put links in the description to other resources, to our resources on where you can learn more about Star Wars or from Star Wars. And for those watching, once again, thank you for tuning in. My goal with this channel is actually to make economic concepts understandable and fun, often using pop culture like today. So if you enjoyed this, please click like and click subscribe to the channel. It actually helps me out a ton by doing that. So I'd appreciate it if you'd take a moment to do that.
I did it. Do it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And no, thank you again for taking time to talk. This was a lot of fun.
This was fun. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
To the audience, we'll see you in the next video.